West Hill United is a progressive spiritual community where how you live is more important than what you believe. West Hill United is a people, a place, an idea. We are a community living out of a progressive faith, striving to make a positive difference in our own lives, the lives of others, and the world. Join us Sundays at 10:30 a.m. or connect with us at any time.
Decided to organize the VisionWorks document under the headings that were just on the screen there: grounded in life, guided by love, and growing in wisdom. Tomorrow that theme will be lifted up. Greta's doing the funeral in Woodstock, and community choir is doing a tribute to Doug. And they've asked if I would play for Doug's choice of song at the funeral, which is, we're going to sing it in a moment. And also the community choir has just learned that song, Farewell, and they'll be singing that, which is quite beautiful, in Woodstock tomorrow. I wanted to lift up those values in a theme, and I went looking for people that would lift that theme, and that would, if I told you about them, they'd stay with you, and you would find these remarkable people inspiring and encouraging and something to be very glad about in the midst of difficulties. And one's from a long time ago, one's a group, and one's a person that's still working real hard. And I wanted to capture the idea of what happens when we put compassion and courage together. We can have compassion for something and not have worked up the courage to do something with it. We all sit there with lots about that. And then some people have a lot of courage and they put it into activities that run right over people's lives and feelings. So it's together, the compassion and the courage. And as I was looking for people that exemplified that and that were really amazing people to meet and to think about, I gathered together the three because they had taken their compassion and drummed up their courage and made a difference in the world through something to do with learning and education. Learning and education. So when I put learning in action, what we mean by that would be social action, social justice action, environmental action. So the first person that I bumped into was Neil deGrasse Tyson. If you've ever seen some of his lectures, I understand nothing about science, and I understand every one of his lectures. So I give that to you. He's a remarkable secular humanist, terrific. I'm sorry.
His mic's kind of feeding back.
You were looking fine, my notes were looking bad, so I had to put the change of glasses on. Tyson said, "For me, I am driven by two main philosophies. Know more today about the world than I knew yesterday. Know more about the world than I knew yesterday, and lessen the suffering of others wherever I can." And he said, you'd be surprised how far that gets you. Learn something more and use it to lessen the suffering of somebody. So I'm taking my first person. I'm going to ask them to put the tech team to put the first slide up. You may recognize him. He's not any longer with us. That is John Dewey, the philosopher, educator. In July of 1894, a train pulled up into Chicago railway station. The train was delayed because of what you may have read about in the past, the Pullman railway strike, where all the operators of the train, who were very poorly paid, went on strike for higher wages and made many, many people very angry, mostly because their trips were delayed, not because the workers were not earning a good living. But off the train walked a young man named John Dewey. He was coming to be a professor of philosophy and pedagogy, which is the teaching of teaching, in Chicago University of Chicago, just a beautiful new university. His mom was a devoted fundamentalist Christian, and his father was a grocer who read deeply and widely all through his life. Dewey lived from the Civil War to the Cold War. Can you imagine that lifespan? From the Civil War to the Cold War. He wrote 37 books, published 766 articles in 151 journals on everything from poverty to social justice to education to the importance of hanging beautiful artwork in post offices. So this was a man, again, a Renaissance man of all sorts of things. He stepped out of the train into the strike and immediately started talking with the strikers, learning about their situations. That led to learning about the settlement houses in Chicago, which would be our hostels or our places of refuge. He praised the leader, Eugene Debs, for helping with the strikers, which was very unpopular with some. He was inspired by these people, and I'm just going to pause after that for you to remember who inspires you. He was inspired by the lives and the values of Thomas Jefferson and Walt Whitman, who were leaders in democracy, William James, the founder of pragmatism, not pragmatism as just do the easiest, best thing, but pragmatism as a whole wonderful philosophy, and Eugene Debs, the champion of radical reform. That's the moment where you're thinking of who has inspired you in life. But these inspired him. His educated views, his views of education, right away he said, we got to change this, we got to change this. Students should be active, not passive. They should learn to do things with their hands. They should learn to do things that get used in life. Because our world, he said, was radically changing, we need to radically change how we educate people. He wanted a democratic classroom where people had a voice. He wanted the students to learn that we are social beings that are interconnected with each other. He linked education to compassion for others, and that was his life quest, to bring those two together. So education to him was for social reform, to make lives better, not just to learn more, but to make lives better. So school was not just a place to gain knowledge, it was, and not even just to reach your own potential. Good things, knowledge, own potential. But as a place, he said, a place to learn how to live. A place to learn how to live, how to use common skills for the common good. Beautifully put in many of his books. He's really worth reading. When I tell you about someone, I expect that you will want to go look him up and learn more about him and get excited about that. If learning had to be relevant and practical, he also had to put it into his books for that. So the next slide is what he said about education. Next slide. Education is a process of living, not a preparation for living. Next slide.
I always said that.
We do not learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experiences. I've heard someone giving a talk at work about somebody thought he knew everything because he'd worked there for 35 years. He says, I have 35 years of experience, I should be listened to. And the person said, some people have 1 year of experience 35 times. And he wasn't reflecting on his experience, he just had it. So Dewey went out into the world, and I'm just going to bang, bang, bang list some of the things. These are just some of the things he did, because it wasn't very good to talk that education was for living if he wasn't demonstrating that. And so Dewey founded the American Association of University Professors, helped organize the New York City Teachers Union, supported the founding of the National Association for the Advancement, in those days, of colored people, and the American Civil Liberties Union. He worked tirelessly for years and years on the settlement houses to get people food and shelter and clothing, spoke out against every brutal execution of civil and social activists all over the world. With Albert Einstein, became a member of the United States section of the International League for Academic Freedom. I'd never heard of that. What a wonderful thing he did. He traveled to Turkey and South Africa and Mexico, advising governments how to educate people on how to live. And stepping out in courage, which that took a lot of, on women's rights. Dewey believed that a woman's place in society was determined by her environment, not just her biology. On women, he said this, you think, this is a very strange sort of quote, but if you take it, you think too much of women in terms of sex. Think of them as human individuals for a while, dropping out the sex qualification, and you won't be so sure of some of your generalizations about what they should and shouldn't do. Lovely. brave. Think this is back in the early 1900s. He marched in a suffragette parade. He marched with the women in a suffragette parade and campaigned for women's rights to vote. And as a secular humanist, he described humanism as an expansion of human life, an expansion in which nature and the science of nature are made willing servants of the human good. So knowledge translated into the human goods. He was hailed as one of the next slide shows just a glimpse. The next one, sorry, there. Just a few of the things he was involved with, which you're going to see when you look him up later. And he received great adulation. He was one of the most prominent philosophers in America and in the world at the time. However, not everybody liked him. Not all Americans praised him. There was sharp criticism for every advanced idea he had. Every time he tried to apply learning to ordinary life, of course, that would open up the world to see what was ordinary life in America, and there was a hell of a lot of problems. And so to apply it there, he was resisted and resisted and resisted. Progressive became a slur. You call progressive, you're one of Dewey's people, and you're trying to upend the world. But he welcomed the dialogue. He hung in there. Courage and compassion. His works have been edited by a man named Larry Hickman, and Larry Hickman said this, that's the next slide, about Dewey. He was loved, honored, vilified, and mocked, as perhaps no other major philosopher in American history. He overcame his own natural timidity. He was naturally actually rather shy to become an outspoken defender of what he believed was the real reason for education, which was to help. And he even wanted a new role for the philosopher. He thought maybe a philosopher should be working with things that mattered. That's what he said. They probably thought they already were, but he was saying if it doesn't touch the ground, it doesn't matter. And for compassion, courage with compassion, he was a reformer, a socialist, a secular humanist, a meliorist. Beautiful word, means he had that kind of thought that maybe we could get better in life. Maybe we could get better, that's what that is. And he transformed schools, he connected students to real life, and he encouraged them to become critical thinkers and people that would put their learning to practice in life. We've got one person who is very interested in what we're talking about, but I'm not sure if you could find them and mute them. If not, I'm happy to have them part of the conversation. The second group, there was a group of people, the second one, on the next slide, please. I think I'd heard of this, and some of you may have, but I really didn't have a grasp of it, and now I do, and I'm so impressed. Scientists as activists. This is a slide of the Union of Concerned Scientists. Now, I can imagine scientists that didn't join it saying, what do you say, we're not concerned? Of course we're concerned. But he's pointing the concern in a very, very direct, directing it very closely to the problems of the world, not to the problems of whether the adverb in front of a noun in front of a philosophy that Aristotle said was important. And I love that stuff, and it's good. But they're saying, we've got problems, people, and so let's use our work to help them. Their banner is the next slide. Maybe that was the banner. Oh, there. They collected in their books all the scientists that actually put their science to use. And there were so many of them. But they're more than just scientists. They're analysts, they're engineers, they're policy experts, advocates. And the next slide shows their equation. And it puts science for justice. Not just science for money, science for advancement even, but science for justice. I got a list of their statement of values, which I didn't have when we were doing Vision Works, but it would match beautifully. Here's the values of this group of scientists that say we're concerned with the environment, we're concerned with poverty, we're concerned with water, we're concerned with the problems. And their values are this: science in the service of people and the planet. justice and equity for people of all races and incomes, now and for future generations. Courage to take principled, science-based stands in the public arena. To take principled, science-based stands in the public arena. Integrity, to always examine evidence critically, openly, and honestly, which means if you're out there in the public arena and someone has just proved that your scientific experiment wasn't right, you have to swallow hard and say, let's keep going. Democracy, to promote a voice for all in government decisions. And action, inspiring and mobilizing people to build a healthier, safer, and more just world. The Association of Concerned Scientists, and there's hundreds of them. Their mission is to use a rigorous science to solve our planet's most pressing problems. Joining with people across the country, we combine technical analysis and effective advocacy to create practical solutions for a healthy, safe, and sustainable future. I took a snap of their book. The next slide would be their book. They've written a book on practical guidance that non-scientists can understand. And they took to the streets. So the next slide shows protests, just some of the protests. When we were thinking about being grounded in life, Richard Feynman, who you may have read, a scientist, said, science is an enabling power to do either good or evil. Whatever you learn in science, you could use it. The inventor of the nuclear bomb was destroyed of how his science was used. So it can be used for good or bad because the science doesn't come with instructions on how to use it. So that's up to the values. That's up to how do we want to use that. So courage and compassion to speak out in the public arena for justice based on science, which always can be wrong. That's the scientific method, is keep testing. If it's shown to be wrong, go back to the drawing board. Keep checking. The last person I want you to meet, you may have already met online, and there she is, lovely, Malala Yousafzai. She is the youngest Nobel Prize laureate in the world, the second Pakistani to win the Nobel Prize. She's a human rights advocate for the education of women and children, all children of any sex, in her native homeland, where the Pakistani Taliban had at times banned girls from schools. Banned girls from schools. Boys could still go to school, but girls couldn't. She names as her influences, the people that inspired her to take her compassion and add the courage and do something, is on the next slide. There's the Prime Minister of Pakistan, and there is Martin Luther King there, and Nelson Mandela, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and also, I think it's in the first slide, her dad. Her dad was an activist too, and he had death threats and stoning of her house for his stands on justice. When she was 11, she started to blog about the situation in Pakistan and got so well known. She actually rose to prominence as a blogger at age 11. She gave interviews in print and on television. She was nominated for the International Children's Peace Prize by Desmond Tutu. And on October 2012, which wasn't that long ago, while she was on a bus after taking an exam at her school, she and two other girls were shot by a Taliban gunman in an assassination attempt targeting her and her activism. She was shot in the head and taken right away to the hospital. She ended up in Birmingham, UK, to be treated because it was such a devastating wound. And that event sparked an international movement against anything that would take a young girl on a bus coming home from school, target her. It wasn't just about girls, her for the work she was doing. The Taliban sent a message that she had no right to take a stand about girls. She was a girl. She had no right to take the stand about girls. And so the courage that would have taken already by age 11. After her recovery, she opened schools. She spoke wherever she could. The family was displaced in the wartime, and they had nothing. The family was separated. She's written about her life in a refugee camp. She wrote a book called I Am Malala. She was named after a Pakistani folk hero. Her dad named her. And her dad was the one that inspired her to get out into the public in Pakistan. Her statement was, "How dare the Taliban take away my basic right to education and every other girl?" And that's before she was shot. And after she was shot, she recovered and kept saying the same thing. Angelina Jolie, I don't really know what she does. Is she a singer? She's a singer, right? She's an actress. Don't know if she sings. No. I rely on people that know more about contemporary things than me. Anyway, she wrote an article explaining the shot that Malala got shot to her own children, and answered the question, why did those men think they needed to kill her? And that sparked in schools everywhere. Why did they think, what was she doing? And that lifts up the idea. There was a rumor that went around that she'd been brainwashed by her father. There's a rumor that went around it was the CIA that actually arranged for her to be shot, all sorts of things like that, and they had to still keep speaking up for the truth of it. She took a petition to the United Nations, and they decided that their banner would be, "No child will be left out of school by 2015, no child anywhere," with the hope that girls like Malala everywhere will all soon be going to school. And so they called on the world in 3 points. We call on Pakistan to agree to plan to deliver education to every child. We call on all countries to outlaw discrimination against girls. We call on the international organizations to ensure the world's 61 million out-of-school children are in education by the end of 2015. Did not happen, but they're still calling. Greta Thunberg met with her as she was studying in Oxford to encourage her. Her byword became to the world, invest in books, not bullets. Invest in books, not bullets. Take the learning that girls need to know and take it out into the world. The terrorists thought they would change my aims and stop my ambitions, but nothing changed in my life except this. Weakness, fear, and hopelessness died. Strength, power, and courage was born. I am not against anyone. Neither am I here to speak in terms of personal revenge against the Taliban or any other terrorist group. I'm here to speak up for the right of education for every child. I want education for the sons and daughters of the Taliban and all terrorists and extremists, because I would hope that would make a difference. John Stewart, the interviewer, who's always very clever and interesting, he's a comedian, he interviewed her, and he asked her what she would do to take it back, like to get back at the Taliban for that. And she says, I started thinking about that, and I used to think that the Taliban would come again, and maybe he would just kill me. But then I said to myself, if he comes, what would you do, Malala? And I like that question. What if things got worse? What if we didn't have the resources we have right now in our world? What would I do, Scott? What would I do? How would I be? What would you do, Malala? And then I would reply to myself, Malala, just take a shoe and hit him. That's what she would do. But then I said, if you hit a Taliban with your shoe, then there would be no difference between you and the Talib. You must not treat others with cruelty, and that much harshly. You must fight others, but through peace and through dialogue and through education. And then I said, I will tell him, the Taliban, how important education is, and that I even want education for your children as well. And I will tell him, that's what I want to tell you, now do what you want. Compassion and courage, I nail it to the wall. Compassion and courage to get the freedom to learn for all she was doing was she was advocating for something we take for granted here, that all genders go to school. And lastly, She condemned the Taliban's ban on girls' education and said the Taliban will continue to make excuses to prevent girls from learning beyond primary school. They want to erase girls and women from all public life in Afghanistan. And so I ask leaders around the world to take collective action to hold all terrorists accountable for violating the human rights of women and girls, and therefore all people. Courage and compassion. Learning in action, all three. Dewey took his learning about education, wanting a more open, democratic, skills, life-oriented education for children. And he demonstrated that in every social justice act he took part in. And he's known for both the criticism about his new ways of thinking and also for the bravery it took for him to do that. Scientists that are concerned and that band together, you've often seen the March for Science on the news, and scientists that are now taking more visible stands. And you may or may not agree with some of the methods they use to get the attention to it. But as we were talking about some months ago here about when it was my talk that I was remembering, and now I've forgotten who the person's name is, which is bad, but we were saying he went to the Congress and said, I can't educate you anymore. Now you have to do something with it. There's no more information needed. You've got the information. Now we need the courage. So learning in action. So I just lift up these people in this organization. If we put all their faces on the screen, we wouldn't have enough screens. So we celebrate them. We honor them. If there's any way you can ever help one of them, even if it could be a local scientist, it could be a local educator, it could be a local social activist for women, whatever, to take courage and compassion and put it into action. And that comes back to being grounded in life, real life, as those people were. They looked at life square on, and take the compassion to say, as Malal said, what would I do? What can I do? And that can be a small thing, that can be a medium thing, that can be a big thing. Sometimes when it's a big thing, we just join with others that are doing big things and celebrate that. So lastly, just to encourage each other. If I need a bit more courage, I want to look over at you and find some inspiration for courage. If I need a little more compassion for something and I've got all the courage and my compassion isn't very warm there, I want you to help me warm up that compassion and think with the two of them together so that we serve each other more beautifully, more justly, with more integrity. I'm going to turn it now to Babette. This is a song I'd forgotten about. I wrote it a long time ago. I forgot about it. I really like it, so I'm glad to resurrect it for you.
The first reading is by the poet and civil rights activist Maya Angelou. Courage is the most important of all virtues, because without courage, you can't practice any other virtue consistently. You can practice any virtue erratically, but nothing consistently without courage. The second reading brings us to the words of Albert Einstein, the theoretical physicist who made the groundbreaking advances in quantum theory, relativity, photoelectricity, statistical mechanics, radiation, gravitational force, and also developed what is now known as the most famous scientific equation of all time, E equals mc squared, regarding the relationship between energy and mass. However, the relationships, the interrelations in life, were of far more importance to him, as is evident in the following. A human being is a part of the whole called by us the universe, a part limited in time and space. He experiences himself, his thoughts, and feelings as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us, Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. Offered as wisdom for the journey. May we walk in His light.
Become a sustaining champion of West Hill United's work by committing to an automatic monthly donation. Learn more or donate now through Canada Helps.